heroes.
This is not the first time that British troops have been in Afghanistan. In the late 19th century, this country was of huge importance strategically, as the British were very concerned about the Russians encroaching into their empire in India. Afghanistan was seen as a vital buffer zone to keep Russia at bay, and the British wanted to make sure that they were in control. When Afghanistan refused to accept British influence, war was inevitable. The 72nd and 92nd Scottish Regiments played a key role in the successful campaign to assert British control here. But it was their involvement in one of the most celebrated military marches that they would be remembered for.
With the war seemingly won, the Highlanders and the rest of the British Army were pulling out of Afghanistan when they heard that a British force west of Kandahar had been wiped out and the city was under siege.
One of the greatest and most successful commanders of the Victorian era, General Roberts, decided to march a force of 10,000 men 320 miles through hostile territory to relieve the stricken British forces. It was an incredible act of human perseverance that would go down in history. The now famous march started on the 8th of August 1880, with the men heading to the mountains in the southwest of the country. The terrain was the hardest any Highlander had experienced, and the conditions they had to endure unbelievably challenging. During the day, the temperatures could be as high as 92 degrees Fahrenheit, yet at night it would plunge down to freezing point.
The march would begin at 4 o'clock in the morning and finish at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when camp would be made. The baggage train would start at 4 o'clock in the morning, but not get there till 5 o'clock in the afternoon because it was much slower.
The troops bravely marched over rough stony mountain tracks in sweltering heat and through exhausting sandstorms, with the threat of attack hanging over them constantly. But after 24 grueling days, they finally reached Kandahar.
The outcome of this epic march was a successful storming and relief of Kandahar and the end of the Second Afghan War. It was one of the many successful outcomes for the Scottish regiments. Let's hope the same can be said of the boys out here today.
This is a very tough posting, and not just because the Taliban are proving to be a hugely challenging enemy. Questions have been asked from the very start about whether British troops should be sent here, and the war continues to be a highly contentious subject. But on a day-to-day basis, the soldiers have other concerns. It's vital that the men stationed here stay in top physical condition, as when they're out on a mission, they're often required to carry a 60-kilogram pack, plus their weapon and ammunition.
Carrying the kit is phenomenal. The weight inside the kit is ridiculous, and we've got countermeasures that we have to carry as well, and being a big lad myself, I need to take that as well as my kit, so like the kit is heavy.
So far, the Black Watch have been out on 14 missions since they arrived here, destroying narcotics facilities and disrupting insurgent activities. But Operation Herrick, the code name for the British military role here, still has a lot more to achieve.
8 Company are about to deploy on an operation to face their toughest opposition to date, an unseen enemy who can disappear into the countryside or hide amongst the civil population. It's time for orders.
The first point I'm going to make by way of introduction is that clearly we welcome this operation on the basis that we haven't been out for a couple of weeks, and this is going to be something I hope that the Jocks are up for and are looking forward to very much.
Major Matt Munro is the officer commanding A Company. Today's meeting is to brief his officers and senior NCOs on the objectives of the mission. They will then pass the orders down to the privates, otherwise known as the Jocks.
We're going into the Hornet's Nest. If you were to look at the map in the Incel that shows a splodge of red markings showing essentially insurgent activity, we are going into the centre of that big splodge. So The jocks will be in the right frame of mind. They're rested. Just fine-tune that for me, ensure that they're good to go and that they're up for the fight, because they may very well get it. We've got called Parsifal. I'm not concerned about the prospect of getting into a fight. The key thing is that I want to be able to manoeuvre my company such that if it should happen, clearly I want to give the company the best chances of succeeding by ensuring that it happens very much on my terms. So it's important that I'm able to generate perhaps some deception. I'm keen to be able to surprise the enemy as opposed to getting surprised by the enemy myself. Alpha Company, the Estonian army, will conduct a feint off to the northwest of the Cat. So off this sketch here, it's about here. The intent being that the insurgents discern that that is the beginning of the friendly forces' assault on the Cat. That will, if you like, focus the insurgents in that direction. We don't have the luxury of being vehicle mounted, hence we have to carry everything that we need. It's a pretty Spartan existence, but my understanding is that that's been the lot of the infantrymen for hundreds of years, so nothing changes.
Using local intelligence that has been gathered in preparation for the mission, the briefing gives the men a clear idea of the terrain that they'll be going into, and the houses, or compounds as they are known, that might pose a threat.
The compounds are much more dense and much more clustered along both of the routes, which is a key sort of point to note. And a number of firing points have been identified en route Dorset, firing onto movement in the vicinity of Route Cornwall on the Shamala. Next slide.
With every operation, the troops face a range of different threats. But one of the biggest dangers here in Afghanistan is that insurgents may place improvised explosive devices, or IEDs. And it's vital that the team make sure that they have made every effort to prepare for and minimise the risks. It's not an easy brief.
The difficulty for the soldiers is to be prepared to fight at the extreme end of the spectrum of conflict, if you like. You know, to fight with a bayonet on the end of his rifle. Yet, right at the opposite end of the spectrum, we're asking him to interact with local nationals and to be compassionate. The company group, collectively, I would suggest, you've set some very high standards. My last point is to say that I'm very keen that your performance is worthy not just of the company group, but also that you make a good impression that is consistent with the Black Watch and also with the Royal Regiment of Scotland.
These soldiers face a unique and demanding set of challenges serving in Afghanistan. But over the centuries, all the Scottish regiments have shared one experience: going into battle in unfamiliar territory and having to deal with the unexpected. In the late 19th century, one of the most punishing conflicts the Scots had to fight in was the Boer War in South Africa. In this notoriously long and bloody struggle, the British came up against the Boers, the descendants of the original Dutch and French settlers who were determined to assert their independence from British rule, which they greatly resented. The Boers were equipped with modern rifles, and in some cases better artillery than the British had themselves. The result was a series of brutal clashes that brought heavy casualties. The Scottish regiments had secured a reputation in Empire for holding their ground, but they did not always emerge victorious. In one of the fiercest engagements of this war, the Battle of Margus-Fontein, the Highland Brigade took part in a nighttime attack on the Boers, which went disastrously wrong.
All the afternoon until dusk, a terrific bombardment took place, and every gun we possessed fired for all it was worth. It plainly warned the enemy we were about to attack. The Boers must have known we were coming. In fact, I believe our steps were dogged throughout the night.
I've come to the Boer War Memorial in Glasgow's Kelvin Grove Park to meet military historian Alan Carswell and find out more about this terrible episode in the history of the Highland Brigade.
They got there, they got to the wrong place, the dawn came, they found themselves under concentrated, sustained, accurate rifle fire from the Boer position. The Boers weren't where they thought they were supposed, the British thought they were. It was a disaster, and the Highland Brigade suffered accordingly.
Suddenly a signal lamp flashed brightly, quite close, about 300 yards away on our left. I uttered an exclamation, but the words were hardly out my mouth before a sheet of flame blazed a few hundred yards to our front, and a hail of bullets swept through us. The leading battalion was simply shattered. Many fell, some tried to charge but became entangled in a wire fence and were shot, and all was confusion. I just had time to shout out my loudest, "HLI, lie down!" This was instantly done, but it was useless. The whole column was broken up. The next instant, a disorganised mob swept over us. There was no stopping them.
With their ranks in total disarray, the Highland Brigade were completely overwhelmed by the enemy, with devastating consequences.
Casualties were heavy, which obviously had an effect back home as well.
Indeed, the losses were heavy. The prestige and status of the Scottish regiments, and the Highland regiments particularly, meant that it had become almost accepted that the Highland regiments had to fight together in a recognisable formation. So they were, the impact of that was double-edged. If it worked and the brigade was victorious, it was a great national achievement. If it failed, it could be a great national disgrace. So it was vital that Magersfontein was transformed from a military defeat into a kind of national victory of spirit and determination, and that's what happened.
The battle may have been lost, but the courage of the soldiers as they bravely faced their deaths has gone down in history and was commemorated in the Pipe Retreat March, the Highland Brigade at Magersfontein. The shocking scale of the defeat, however, caused great distress in Scotland. The Highland Brigade had lost some 700 men. The end of the Second Boer War signified a huge shift in the mentality of both the public and the military in their feelings towards the British Empire. Many people believed that the tactics the British employed against the Boers were immoral and that the war was potentially unjust.
With the onset of the 20th century, it was hoped that lessons had been learned. Within 100 years, Britain's imperial arc had ascended to its peak, but by 1902, it was definitely in decline. Scottish military achievements were something to be unreservedly proud of, even if at times the reasons for those conflicts were not.
We've seen over the last 2.5 years the role that Scottish soldiers played in Afghanistan. He's determined and he has contributed enormously to a successful campaign so far. There's a long way to go, but the regiment's here for the next however many years, and we will continue to play our part.
The 20th century would see huge advances in armaments and weapons, and in 1914 the Scots were back in the firing line. In the final episode of this series, we look at the vital role the Scots played in the First and Second World Wars and join the soldiers in Afghanistan as they prepare to go out on a hazardous operation in Helmand Province.
And you can see the last in the series of Scots at War next Tuesday night at 9.